Have you ever wondered what might happen if a bride, just moments away from saying "I do," chose to walk away instead? Not out of fear, but out of courage. What if the man waiting at the altar wasn't the one she was meant to choose? What if her story didn't begin at the wedding, but on a quiet road in the rain, beside a broken-down car, and the one who helped her wasn't dressed in a tuxedo, but covered in grease and kindness? This is not just a story about walking away. It's about choosing yourself, choosing honesty, and discovering love in the last place you'd expect. But I'll let the story speak for itself. Before we begin, if you enjoy heartwarming stories filled with healing, second chances, and quiet miracles, don't forget to subscribe to the channel and turn on the notification bell so you never miss the next story that just might change your day. Now, let's begin. A poor mechanic helped fix the luxury wedding car. The bride immediately asked to leave with him. The Oregon morning had started like any other, quiet, gray, with the soft mist of spring clinging to the trees lining the old mountain roads. Cal Dawson was driving his beat-up Chevy pickup back from a farm on the edge of town, the engine humming low beneath the sound of country music playing faintly from the dashboard. His clothes were smudged with oil, the cuffs of his jeans damp from kneeling in muddy grass. The old woman's tractor he'd repaired that morning was working again, and she'd tried to press a $10 bill into his hand. He'd smiled, tipped his cap, and walked away with nothing but the satisfaction of fixing something that mattered. That was Cal, a man who didn't do things for thanks. As he rounded a bend in the road, windshield wipers swiping steadily against the mist, something caught his eye. A gleaming white vintage Bentley pulled awkwardly to the side of the narrow road. The hood was popped. Steam curled up into the damp air. Cal eased off the gas and coasted to a stop 20 yards ahead. He didn't think. He never did when someone was stranded. He grabbed his coat from the passenger seat and stepped out into the light rain. The moment his boots hit the asphalt, a sense of familiarity washed over him. Not the car, not the setting, but the feeling, the silent call of someone in need. It wasn't obligation, it was instinct. As he approached the Bentley, a man in a tuxedo was pacing beside it, cursing into his phone. The driver, no doubt. But it wasn't the flustered valet that caught Cal's attention. It was the figure in the back seat. Through the rain-specked window, he saw her, a young woman, dressed in what had to be the most intricate wedding gown he'd ever seen. Lace spilled over her shoulders like a waterfall, her hair coiled in a perfect chignon, pearls glinting faintly in the dull morning light. But her posture didn't match the elegance. She sat completely still, hands clasped in her lap, eyes vacant. Not fearful, not frantic, just quiet, lost. Cal tapped lightly on the window. She turned her head slowly, startled at first, then studying him with tired eyes. He gave a small, reassuring smile, the kind that asked nothing and promised nothing, only warmth. "I'm a mechanic," he said, his voice muffled through the glass. "Mind if I take a look?" The door opened, not the driver's, hers. She stepped out slowly, holding the gown up to avoid the puddles. She didn't say anything at first, just stood there, arms crossed against the damp air, watching him with a mixture of curiosity and disbelief. As if she couldn't decide whether to trust a stranger in muddy boots or get back in the car and wait for someone more official. "I saw the steam," Cal said, already lifting the hood. "Old engine. These Bentleys are beautiful, but fussy, especially in the rain." The chauffeur looked over, finally noticing Cal for the first time. "Hey, who the hell are—" The woman raised her hand. Just a gesture, small, quiet, final. The driver stopped talking. Cal grinned to himself and ducked under the hood. 10 seconds in, he spotted the problem. Loose connection, wet plug, simple fix. He had the tools in his truck. As he jogged back to get them, he realized she hadn't gone back inside. She was standing by the tree line, letting the mist soak into the delicate fabric of her veil. By the time he returned, she was watching the lake beyond the trees, not the road. Cal knelt beside the car, talking more to fill the silence than to impress her. "You know," he said, tightening a clamp, "I once saw a guy stall out in a '68 Camaro on his wedding day. Left his bride waiting at the altar for 30 minutes. She thought he'd run off. Almost married the best man out of spite." "Ah," she gave a soft, startled laugh. the kind that sounded foreign coming from someone who hadn't used it in a while. "What happened?" she asked. "He got there in time. Wedding went on. But she made him sell the car after. Said it had too much drama under the hood." The woman didn't laugh again, but she smiled. And then, after a pause, she said, "You didn't ask." "Ask what?" "Who I am, where I'm going, why I'm in a wedding dress by the side of the road." Cal straightened, wiping his hands with a rag from his pocket. "Didn't think you wanted to be asked." She tilted her head, eyes sharp now, alert. "Most people would." "I'm not most people." A beat of silence passed between them, then another. She looked down at the glistening gravel beneath her feet. "What if I told you I don't want to go where that car was taking me?" Cal didn't move. The rain was steady now. His shirt stuck to his back. "I'd say you might need a different ride," he answered carefully. She took a step toward him. "What if I asked you to take me there? Anywhere. Just not back." He looked at her, then, really looked. She wasn't just running from a wedding. She was running from a life built by others, one polished to perfection on the outside but hollow within. Her eyes weren't desperate. They were determined. "Anywhere?" he asked. She nodded. "Anywhere with air. Anywhere with space. Somewhere I can think. Just for a little while." Cal looked down at his pickup truck. Old, rusting, smelled like motor oil and pine needles. "I've got a thermos of black coffee and a country radio station that only plays George Strait," he said slowly. "It's not glamorous, but it gets you moving." She smiled again. This time it reached her eyes. "That'll do." Without a word, she turned, stepped out of her designer heels, and climbed barefoot into his truck. Cal stood for a second, stunned. Then he grabbed her shoes, tossed them onto the passenger floorboard, and climbed in beside her. The wedding Bentley sputtered to life behind them as they pulled away, but neither of them looked back. The rain had lessened, but the clouds still hung low like secrets too heavy to rise. Cal drove in silence, hands steady on the worn steering wheel. The cab of his truck smelled like old leather, coffee, and the pine-scented air freshener that hadn't worked in years. Evelyn sat beside him, her wedding gown bundled in her lap like a fragile memory she wasn't quite ready to let go of. Neither of them spoke at first. The road ahead twisted through evergreens and open pastures, leading away from the estate and toward the mountains where Cal lived. Windshield wipers squeaked rhythmically, the only sound besides the occasional chirp of a distant bird. Evelyn reached up and slowly removed a pearl hairpin, then another. She placed them in the small cup holder between them, like relics from a past life. A faint sigh escaped her lips. Her shoulders lowered. Just slightly, but Cal noticed. He always noticed the quiet things. "Do you live far?" she finally asked, her voice soft, like it had forgotten how to carry weight. "About 40 minutes. I've got a little place up by Miller's Ridge. Quiet, no one around. Figured it might give you time to breathe." He glanced at her, adding gently, "Unless you want me to drop you at the edge of town?" She shook her head. "No, that sounds perfect, actually." A beat passed. She turned toward the window, eyes tracking the blur of trees. "I think I was supposed to be halfway down the aisle by now," she said, her voice calm but distant. Cal didn't reply. He didn't have to. Evelyn pulled her knees up, careful not to wrinkle the gown further, though it was already speckled with road dust and raindrops. She looked at him, really looked, for the first time. "You didn't even ask my name." "I figured if you wanted me to know it, you'd tell me," Cal said. She smiled faintly. "Evelyn." "Cal." "I know. The name's on your toolbox." She nodded toward the back seat, where an old red metal box sat wedged beside a folded tarp. He chuckled. "Guess I'm not as mysterious as I thought." "I like that about you," she said without thinking, then flushed. I mean, I like that you're not trying to figure me out, or fix me." Cal didn't respond right away. He turned onto a gravel road that led toward the mountains, the trees growing taller and closer on either side. "I fix cars," he said finally. "People, not so much." They passed a small pond, then a weathered fence. Evelyn exhaled, resting her head against the cold window glass. "I don't think I ever wanted a wedding like that," she murmured. "All those people, all that money. It never felt like mine." "Then why go through with it?" Cal asked gently, no judgment in his tone. "Because it's what was expected." Her answer came fast. Too fast. She caught herself, frowned. Because when you grow up in a family like mine, you learn early that expectations are currency. You either meet them or you lose value. Cal nodded slowly, understanding more than he let on. My mom used to say, better to be wanted for your last name than forgotten for your dreams. Evelyn laughed, bitter and small. I believed her for a long time. Schweiken. They crested a hill, and Cal's cabin came into view. A modest, two-bedroom structure with a wraparound porch and an old wind chime that jingled softly in the breeze. A rusty mailbox tilted beside the driveway, and a hammock sagged between two pine trees out front. Evelyn stared at it as if it were a painting from a life she'd never been allowed to imagine. You live here alone? She asked. Cal nodded. Mostly. Just me and the occasional raccoon. He parked, turned off the ignition, and climbed out. Evelyn hesitated. Her dress was bulky, the hem now damp and dragging. She tried to gather it with one hand, unsure of her next step. Cal appeared at her door before she could reach for the handle. He opened it without a word, reached out his hand. She looked at it for a moment, then took it. Inside, the cabin was warm, with mismatched furniture and shelves lined with books and old photos. A kettle whistled faintly from the stove. Evelyn's breath caught at the simplicity of it all. Cal draped his jacket over a chair and disappeared into the kitchen. Coffee? Yes, please. She wandered toward the mantel. A photo of a young man, smiling in uniform, caught her eye. Your brother? She asked softly when Cal returned with two steaming mugs. He nodded. Eli, younger than me, always made better choices, except the one that cost him his life. Evelyn accepted the mug without another word. They sat across from each other in the small living room. Outside, the mist had thickened, settling into the trees like an old friend. Inside, the silence felt different now, companionable. Cal sipped his coffee and watched her, but not with curiosity, just presence. Evelyn broke the silence again. You know, when I was a kid, I used to sculpt little animals out of soap. My father hated the mess, said girls from good families don't play with knives. Cal raised a brow. Sounds like he didn't know much about art, or kids. He didn't know much about me, she said. Still doesn't. Her voice didn't crack, but it wavered, like a branch caught in the wind, not quite breaking. Cal leaned forward, resting his elbows on his knees. You don't have to tell me why you left, but I'm glad you did. She looked at him then, eyes wide, stunned at the ease with which he said it, as if her decision to abandon the life everyone else had built for her didn't need explanation or apology. No one had ever said that to her before. Thank you, she whispered. He smiled. You're welcome. And for the first time that day, Evelyn felt something she hadn't expected to feel. Safe. By morning, the rain had stopped, leaving a world washed clean. Mist still curled low over the treetops, wrapping Cal's cabin in a hush that felt sacred somehow. Like the woods themselves were holding their breath, waiting to see what would happen next. Evelyn stood barefoot on the porch, her wedding gown now hanging from the rafters, drying in the breeze like a ghost of who she was supposed to be. Cal had found her a soft flannel shirt and a pair of his cleanest jeans. Still a little baggy on her, but she rolled the cuffs and tied the shirt at the waist. She hadn't worn clothes this simple since high school. It felt right. Cal came outside with 2 mugs of coffee, handed her one without a word, and leaned on the porch rail beside her. You sleep okay? He asked. She nodded. I forgot what silence sounded like. He took a sip of his coffee. Most people don't listen for it anymore. They stood there a moment, watching the slow roll of morning settle in. A squirrel darted across the yard. Somewhere in the distance, a bird called out. Evelyn let herself breathe, really breathe, for the first time in months, maybe years. Cal broke the quiet. I have to run into town today. Supplies, oil filters. You're welcome to come or stay here. Whatever you need. Evelyn looked at him, surprised. You're not worried I'll run off or disappear? Cal shrugged. You're not my hostage. That made her laugh. A real one this time. She shook her head and sipped her coffee, then leaned on the railing beside him. No, I think if I'd wanted to run, I'd have done it before I got in your truck. Cal didn't smile, but something in his expression softened. You're welcome here, he said simply. That's all. Later that morning, Cal gathered his things and Evelyn surprised herself by saying, I'll come with you. They rode into town in his truck, windows down, music low. Evelyn didn't need to be anywhere grand. She just didn't want to be alone. Not yet. When they reached the edge of town, it was like stepping into a different world from her own. A quiet strip of shops, faded signs, a diner with checkered curtains, and a man sweeping the sidewalk with more care than she'd seen from any of her wedding planners. This wasn't the world of limousines and champagne towers. It was humble, lived in, real. They stopped first at the hardware store. Cal was greeted like family. Dawson! Only the owner, a round man with a salt and pepper beard, called from behind the counter. That busted generator at the Kearney barn finally give out? Cal grinned. She's holding on, just barely. Got a new filter in. Always, and what's this? The man asked, his eyes shifting to Evelyn with open curiosity but no judgment. You finally bring someone decent looking around? Evelyn flushed, but Cal just chuckled. Don't scare her off, Joe. She extended her hand. Evelyn, just visiting. Sure, Joe shook it warmly. Well, any friend of Cal's is a friend of the whole town. As they walked the aisles, Evelyn found herself drawn to the simplicity of everything. No designer labels, no hidden costs, just shelves of things meant to build or fix or last. She picked up a small whittling knife, then quickly put it back. Cal noticed. You like to carve? Used to, she said. Soap animals, little figurines. My mother called it a waste of time. She paused. She was wrong. He looked at her thoughtfully but said nothing. That was what she was beginning to appreciate about him. The absence of pressure. He didn't pry. He didn't prod. He just listened. Afterward, they stopped by the town diner for lunch. Cal was clearly a regular. The waitress, a woman in her 50s with a silver braid and laugh lines, brought their coffee without asking and smiled knowingly at Evelyn. You're not from around here, are you, hun? No, ma'am. Well, welcome. If Cal's got you riding shotgun, you must be something special. Evelyn smiled, unsure how to respond. She didn't feel special. She felt in transit, like a person between lives. But the kindness was comforting. They sat in a booth by the window, eating grilled cheese sandwiches and tomato soup. Simple. Perfect. Evelyn caught Cal studying her once, and she tilted her head. What? You're different today, he said. She blinked. In a bad way? In a free way. Evelyn looked down, tracing the rim of her coffee mug. Maybe I am. You should be. The words hung in the air for a moment, heavy with truth. Back at the cabin that afternoon, Cal unloaded the truck while Evelyn explored the back shed. She found a workbench covered in tools, scrap wood, and old chisels. Something stirred in her, the old itch to create, to shape, to bring something into being with her hands. She picked up a block of soft pine and began sketching with the edge of a blade. Cal found her there later, crouched on a stool, focused, the light catching the curve of her brow. You all right? He asked. She looked up, cheeks flushed with something that felt a lot like joy. I forgot what this felt like. To make something. You don't have to forget anymore. She paused, eyes meeting his. Why are you like this? Like what? Kind, patient. You didn't even know me and you just helped. Cal leaned against the doorway, arms crossed. Because once someone helped me when they didn't have to, and it saved my life. Maybe I'm just passing it on. Evelyn nodded slowly. Then I'm glad I met you. He gave her a rare smile. Me too. That evening, they sat on the porch again. No rain this time, just a sky painted in lavender and gold. Evelyn looked at the wedding dress still hanging from the rafters, swaying in the breeze like a white flag. Do you think I'll ever stop feeling guilty for leaving? Cal didn't answer right away. Instead, he said, Do you feel free now? Yes. Then maybe guilt isn't the thing you need to let go of. Maybe it's permission. She turned toward him. To what? To choose your own story. And in the quiet that followed, as the wind moved through the pines and the first stars emerged in the dusk, Evelyn felt something in her chest begin to open. A door she hadn't known was locked. The days blurred gently into each other, like brushstrokes on a canvas washed in early spring light. Evelyn stayed, not because she had nowhere else to go, but because, for the first time in a very long while, no one expected her to be anyone but herself. In Cal's cabin, time moved differently. There were no meetings, no appointments, no stylists or photographers. Mornings began with the scent of brewed coffee and birdsong. Afternoons passed with the hum of tools or the quiet scratch of her carving knife against wood. Evenings belonged to the porch, where conversation came in easy waves or not at all. By the fourth day, Evelyn had begun shaping a small fawn from a block of cedar Cal had tucked away in his shed. Its legs were delicate, its ears alert. It wasn't perfect, but it felt real beneath her hands, the way truth often was, unpolished but alive. She was halfway through refining the fawn's back haunch when Cal came in from the garage, wiping oil from his hands with a red shop towel. "You're getting better," he said, nodding toward the carving in her lap. "Muscle memory," she replied, not looking up. "And maybe," she hesitated, then added, "maybe because I'm not afraid to make mistakes anymore." Cal leaned against the doorframe. "That sounds like someone who's been brave." Evelyn chuckled under her breath. "I don't feel brave. I feel like someone who ran away in a dress that cost more than a car." "That's not what I see." She set the carving down and finally met his gaze. "Then what do you see?" Cal's expression didn't change, but something in his voice shifted. Low, steady, careful. "I see someone who's been handed a script her whole life and finally decided to improvise." That stopped her. No one had ever put it so plainly. She looked away, jaw tight, eyes blinking faster than usual. "And what if the improvisation doesn't lead anywhere? Then at least the voice is yours." That afternoon, the quiet between them deepened, not out of tension, but mutual reflection. Evelyn walked to the lake by herself, carving knife in her pocket, thoughts whirling. She sat on the weathered dock, knees pulled up to her chest, eyes locked on the rippling surface. Her phone had died 2 days ago. She hadn't recharged it. The digital leash had fallen away without a sound, and she hadn't missed it. When she returned to the cabin, the sun was dipping behind the ridge. Cal was chopping wood, shirt sleeves rolled to the elbows, jaw set with quiet focus. She stood for a moment watching him, struck by the ease in which he occupied the world. Not trying to dominate it, just existing in rhythm with it. "How did you do it?" she asked suddenly. He paused, axe mid-swing. "Do what?" "Leave the life you had. Walk away from everything." Cal set the axe down carefully, as if the question weighed more than the tool. "I didn't walk," he said after a moment. "I crashed." He nodded toward the porch. They both walked up and sat down, the last rays of daylight striping their faces with gold. "I used to work on aircraft, defense contracts, big-time stuff, fast jets, high stakes. Thought I was untouchable," he said quietly. "My brother Eli was training as a mechanic too. One weekend, I let him ride along with me to a test site. There was a systems failure, one I should have caught. I lived. He didn't." Evelyn turned toward him, heart tightening. "I'm so sorry." Cal gave a small nod. "I left the job, left the city, sold everything, came here, built the cabin with my hands, didn't talk to anyone for almost a year." He looked up at her. "Then one day a woman's car broke down outside the general store. She had 2 kids in the back seat. She looked scared. I fixed her alternator in 10 minutes, and when she cried, I realized maybe I still had something to give." Silence fell again, rich with meaning. "I've been afraid," Evelyn admitted. "Afraid that if I left, I'd be unrecognizable. That without the schedule, the dresses, the family name, I'd just disappear." Cal's voice was gentle. "You didn't disappear. You arrived." That evening, Evelyn made dinner. Nothing fancy, just grilled vegetables and rice. It felt clumsy at first, but when Cal took a bite and nodded with real approval, she beamed. After they ate, she washed the dishes while he cleaned his tools. The domesticity of it all wasn't romantic. It was something deeper, a shared rhythm, a steadying cadence, the kind that builds long before the heart dares speak. Outside, the wind had picked up. The dress still hung from the rafter beam. It swayed like it wanted to leave too. "I'm not sure what happens next," Evelyn said quietly as they stood side by side watching it move. "You don't have to know. But what if the world comes looking for me?" Cal looked at her with calm eyes. "Then we answer it, on your terms." She nodded slowly, then leaned her head on his shoulder. For a moment, they stood like that, Two people scarred in different ways, each learning the shape of peace in the presence of the other. She didn't love him, not yet, but she trusted him, and that was more than she trusted anyone in a very long time. That night, as she lay in the guest room, staring at the ceiling, Evelyn felt the shift inside her, the tectonic kind, silent but permanent. She wasn't just running anymore. She was waking up, and somewhere beyond the trees, where city lights couldn't touch her and expectations had no voice, a new life was waiting. Not the kind someone handed her, the kind she'd built with her own two hands. It rained again. Not the gentle mist of the first day, but a steady, soaking rain that swept across the ridges, hammered the porch roof, and turned the earth around Cal's cabin to soft mud. Thunder rumbled far off, low and lazy, like a reminder that spring had not yet shed winter's weight entirely. Inside, Evelyn stood barefoot by the kitchen window, watching droplets race down the glass. She held a cup of coffee in both hands, fingers wrapped tightly around the warmth. Her hair was tied back in a loose braid, damp at the edges from stepping onto the porch earlier and letting the rain kiss her face. Cal moved quietly behind her, flipping pancakes on the griddle like it was the most natural thing in the world to cook breakfast for a runaway bride. "Want one with blueberries or plain?" he asked without looking up. She turned, a soft smile tugging at her lips. "Both." He slid one of each onto her plate and placed it on the small table by the window. She joined him there, sitting cross-legged on the bench. "I don't remember the last time someone cooked for me without a staff apron or a tip jar nearby." Cal poured maple syrup without comment. Evelyn studied him for a moment, the way his forearms moved, the way he didn't rush silence, the way his kindness wasn't wrapped in sugar or performance. "You're not curious about what happens next?" she asked. He chewed, swallowed, wiped his mouth with the back of his hand. "I'm more interested in what happens now." She tilted her head. "You always been that way?" He leaned back in his chair, thinking. "I guess after enough of your plans go sideways, you stop planning and start paying attention. Most people spend their lives looking 10 miles ahead. I learned to look about 10 feet. Evelyn looked down at her plate. "I used to plan things to the hour. My life had color-coded calendars, assistants with clipboards, meetings stacked on meetings. I even had a woman hired just to remind me to drink water." She chuckled. "She failed, by the way. I was always dehydrated." Cal smiled. "You seem better hydrated now." They both laughed, and for a moment, the storm outside was just weather. Not a metaphor, not a weight, just rain. Around mid-morning, the power flickered once, then again, then went out entirely. Cal stood and walked to the window. "Transformers probably out. Happens a few times a year when the wind knocks limbs loose." He grabbed a flashlight and a heavy coat from the hook by the door. "I've got a generator in the shed. You stay in. I'll get it going." "I'll come," Evelyn said, already standing. He looked at her, uncertain. "You don't have to." "I know. I want to." They trudged out together into the downpour. Cal's coat swallowed her frame, but she held it tight around her as they made their way to the shed. Inside, the air smelled of sawdust and gasoline. Cal began pulling tools from the shelf while Evelyn watched, droplets running down her cheeks. "Do you ever miss it?" she asked. He paused. "What?" "The life before this. Fast jets, big contracts, the kind of work that gets your name in magazines." Cal crouched by the generator, turning a bolt. "I don't miss the noise or the pressure, but sometimes I miss the precision, the way things made sense. Machines are honest. They break in ways you can measure." He looked up at her, his hair dripping beneath the brim of his cap. "People don't." Evelyn nodded, teeth slightly chattering. "I've spent most of my life surrounded by people who break in silence, behind doors, in mirrors." Cal stood and pulled the starter cord. The generator coughed, then roared to life. He looked at her through the flickering shadows. "And what about you? Do you miss it?" She took a long breath. "Some of it. Not the events or the photographers, but I miss art. I miss waking up and thinking about what I want to make, not what I have to be." The generator's rumble steadied. "And now?" he asked. She stepped closer. "Now I think about what I want to feel, who I want to be near, what I want to wake up next to." They stood there in the half-dark, the rain hammering the roof of the shed, the sound cocooning them. I know what this looks like, Evelyn said softly. A woman running from a wedding into the arms of a stranger. It sounds reckless. Cal didn't flinch. Maybe it is, but not all recklessness is bad. Some of it's just truth that couldn't wait anymore. She studied him. And what if I asked you something reckless right now? He didn't move. Then I'd listen. The rain roared louder. Evelyn hesitated. Then with a quiet intensity that surprised even herself, she asked, "If I asked you to keep driving, like I did that first day, but this time not away from a wedding, just toward something real, would you?" Cal didn't smile. He didn't look away. He simply reached out and tucked a strand of wet hair behind her ear. "I already am," he said. And just like that, something broke open between them. Not lust, not desperation, but recognition. Two people, both running, both arriving, not one kiss, not yet, but something more dangerous, hope. Later, back inside, Evelyn changed into dry clothes while Cal made soup over the propane stove. They didn't talk much the rest of the day, but everything had shifted. It hummed in the air between them, the knowledge that they were no longer strangers, not in any way that mattered. That night, as the wind howled and trees creaked under the weight of water, Evelyn lay awake listening to the generator's hum. She wasn't afraid. She wasn't wondering what came next. Because for the first time in her life, she wasn't planning, she was choosing. And in that choosing, she finally felt real. The sky cleared the next morning, as if the storm had carried something heavy away in its wake. Sunlight filtered through the pine trees, dabbing gold on the porch railing where Evelyn stood with her hands wrapped around a mug of fresh coffee. Her carving sat nearby, now smoothed into the shape of a small fawn, its features defined, gentle. Behind her, Cal emerged from the cabin with a small duffel bag slung over one shoulder. He wore a clean shirt, jeans, and a quiet look of resolve. Evelyn turned toward him, catching the change in the air before he spoke. "I need to make a run to the next town," he said. "Drop off a part for a friend's old rig. Might be a couple hours. You okay here?" She nodded, but something flickered in her eyes. "Actually, would it be all right if I came with you?" Cal studied her a moment. "Of course. You sure you're up for it?" "I think it's time I stop hiding, even if just for a few miles." They loaded into the truck, the old engine rumbling to life as they pulled out onto the dirt road that curled away from the cabin and back toward the world. The windows were down, the scent of damp pine drifting in. Evelyn leaned her head back. "I've been thinking," she said, "about the day we met, about what made me ask you to take me." Cal glanced at her. "What have you come up with?" "That it wasn't just desperation, it was recognition. You were the first person I'd seen in years who didn't ask for anything. You didn't look at me like I was an opportunity or a liability." He didn't respond right away. Just let the silence stretch comfortably between them. Eventually he said, "I didn't know who you were. That helped." She smiled faintly. "I think I didn't know who I was either." They stopped at a feed store on the edge of a neighboring town. A wide gravel lot with rusted signage and wind chimes made of horseshoes. Cal disappeared inside and Evelyn wandered among the outdoor shelves, letting her fingers drift over gardening tools and rows of seed packets. It was a world she didn't understand, but it welcomed her anyway. "Evelyn." The voice stopped her cold. She turned slowly, every muscle tightening. A tall man in a pressed navy blazer stood by the pickup, mouth parted in disbelief. Colin, her former fiancé. He looked exactly as she remembered, immaculate, powerful, controlling, but somehow smaller, out of place. "You've got to be kidding me," he said, stepping closer. "You're here? In the middle of nowhere? With him?" Evelyn didn't move. "I could ask the same. What are you doing out here?" He gestured to a sleek black SUV parked near the building. "We've been trying to find you. Your parents hired people. Your name's still on everything." "Not for long," she said, more calm than she expected. Cal returned, catching the tail end of the exchange. He froze as he recognized Colin, but said nothing, simply moved to Evelyn's side. She didn't step back, didn't shrink. Colin scowled. "Is this your idea of a rebellion? Slumming it with some mechanic?" Evelyn's voice was clear. "No, this is my idea of choosing something that feels honest." Colin looked her over, his gaze flicking to the carving knife tucked in her belt loop, the flannel shirt, the dusty boots. "You don't belong out here," she smiled steady. "That's the first true thing you've ever said to me. I don't belong out here." Cal tensed beside her. "But I belong with myself," she finished. "And for the first time in my life, that's enough." Colin stepped closer. "Think this is a fairy tale? He won't protect you. This isn't sustainable. The world doesn't run on feelings." Evelyn's eyes were sharp now, no longer the soft blue that once scanned ballrooms for approval. "No, it runs on people who lie to themselves. I've done enough of that." Colin scoffed and turned toward Cal. "You think you're her rescue? You'll be lucky if she doesn't wake up one morning and remember who she really is." Cal stepped forward, not aggressive, but firm. "You should go." Colin paused, searching Evelyn's face for hesitation, fear, regret. He found none. He left without another word. Back in the truck, Evelyn was quiet for a long stretch of highway. The wind played with the edge of her sleeve. She traced a raindrop on the window with one finger. "Are you okay?" Cal asked. She nodded slowly. "I think I needed that." He glanced over. "I spent so much time thinking I had to explain myself. To him, to my parents, to everyone. But you didn't look at me like a problem. You didn't ask for an apology. You didn't owe one." Evelyn smiled, that slow, new smile that had begun to grow stronger with each passing day. "I'm not afraid anymore." They drove in silence, but it wasn't emptiness. It was full, with understanding, with something quiet and fierce that hummed just beneath the surface. When they got back to the cabin, the sky was beginning to blush with the colors of late afternoon. Evelyn stepped out of the truck and looked at the porch, at the window she'd opened that morning, at the carving waiting for her on the table. She turned to Cal. "I don't want to leave this place." "You don't have to. I mean," she searched for the right words, "not just the cabin. I mean this version of me, this woman. I don't want to lose her." Cal stepped close, not touching her, just being near. "Then stay her." "It's not that easy." "I never said it was easy. Just possible." Evelyn nodded. She looked out over the lake, where the water had gone still again, reflecting the changing sky. Somewhere, miles away, a wedding hall had been cleared, a future rewritten. But here, among pines and porch swings and the scent of fresh wood shavings, a new story was beginning, written one quiet choice at a time. A week had passed since Evelyn last heard the sound of her old life echo through her bones. Colin's surprise appearance at the feed store had shaken something loose, but not in the way she would have expected. Instead of pulling her back, it had flung her forward. For once, confrontation didn't leave her crumbling. It left her clearer. She hadn't been a coward that day. She'd stood her ground, and Cal, he hadn't stepped in to speak for her, hadn't tried to solve or soften. He'd simply stood beside her. That was enough. That was everything. This morning, she stood at the cabin's open window, watching a breeze ruffle the trees, the air crisp and dry with the sweetness of a fading spring. Her carving, now a family of deer, not just the fawn, rested on a shelf near the fireplace. Her hands were blistered, her muscles sore, but her heart, lighter than it had been in years. Cal came in from the woods carrying a bundle of firewood, his shirt clinging to his shoulders from effort. He glanced at her with that quiet, attentive gaze she was still getting used to, the one that saw her, but never pressed. "You're up early," he said. She smiled. "Barely slept. My hands wouldn't stop itching." "Too much coffee. Too many ideas." She led him to the small shed-turned studio they'd been cleaning out over the past few days. The dusty workbench now gleamed under the filtered light of a new window pane they'd installed together. The corners still smelled faintly of old varnish and pine. "I want to build something bigger," she said, rolling up her sleeves. "A real piece." Cal leaned against the doorway. "What kind?" "I don't know yet," she admitted, "but it's starting to form, like it's waiting for me to catch up." He nodded. "That's usually when the good stuff happens." Evelyn looked around at the quiet space. She could imagine herself here, day after day, seasons turning beyond the trees, her hands shaping form and feeling from raw wood. No deadlines, no board meetings, just truth and tools. For the first time in her life, she was thinking not about how to escape, but how to build. By mid-morning, Cal had gone down to the lake to check on a leaking canoe he was restoring. Evelyn stayed behind, sweeping the studio floor, sanding the base of a thick cedar slab she'd selected for her new project. She moved like someone with purpose, not urgency. Every movement felt grounded, real. Then came the knock. She paused, heart skipping. No one ever knocked out here. She opened the front door slowly. Standing on the porch, in a tailored blue coat and a faint perfume of roses and formality, was Maggie Hale, her mother. "Hello, Evelyn." Evelyn's breath caught, not from fear, from surprise. "Mom?" Maggie's face was softer than Evelyn remembered. Older, yes, but also stripped of the cold polish she usually wore like armor. "I didn't send Colin," she said quickly. "I only found out after. I came because I had to see you." Evelyn opened the door wider, uncertain, but not unkind. "Come in." They sat at the kitchen table, steam rising from 2 fresh cups of coffee. Outside, the wind rustled through the pines. Inside, silence reigned. "I thought you'd be angry," Evelyn said at last. "I was," Maggie admitted, "but not for the reason you think." Evelyn raised an eyebrow. "I wasn't angry you left the wedding," Maggie continued. "I was angry because you did something I never had the courage to do." That stilled Evelyn. "What do you mean?" Maggie looked down at her cup. "I married your father because it was expected. I built a life on appearances, on contracts and charity galas, and playing the part. I thought I was giving you stability, but I see now, I was showing you a kind of cage." Evelyn swallowed hard. "Why didn't you ever tell me?" "Because I didn't think I had the right. I watched you plan that wedding, and I saw you walking straight into the same life I chose, without love, without voice. And I thought maybe it was too late, that I'd already passed down what mattered most." She reached across the table, her hand resting gently on Evelyn's. "But then you left, and I realized, maybe there's hope for us both." For a long moment, Evelyn said nothing. Then she squeezed her mother's hand. "I didn't know if I'd ever see you again. I didn't know if I deserved to." Tears welled quietly in Evelyn's eyes, but she didn't let them fall. Instead, she stood and walked to the fireplace. She picked up the carved deer family and handed it to Maggie. "I made this here. It's not perfect, but it's mine." Maggie held the piece with reverence. "It's beautiful. It's the first thing I've made without being afraid of how it would be judged." Maggie looked at her daughter then, eyes shining. "I hope you never lose that." Later that evening, after her mother had gone, leaving behind a whispered apology and a quiet promise to begin again, Evelyn sat beside Cal on the porch. He didn't ask what was said. He just offered her a blanket and passed the mason jar of sweet tea between them. "She came," Evelyn murmured, still half in awe, "and she didn't try to pull me back." "She knows you're not coming back," Cal said. "No, but maybe I'm still moving forward, just with new roots." He looked out at the trees. "You're growing something here." "So are you." They fell into silence again, the kind only shared by people who have walked through fire and chosen gentleness on the other side. Evelyn rested her head on Cal's shoulder. "I'm not running anymore," she said softly. "I know. I'm becoming." He turned to her, just enough to meet her gaze. "And it looks good on you." And in the hush of twilight, where the world paused between light and dark, Evelyn knew. This was no longer a pause in her life. This was her life. The following morning, Evelyn awoke before dawn. The cabin was still, the only sounds the ticking of the old kitchen clock and the rustle of wind brushing against the cedar boards. She sat on the edge of the guest bed, her bare feet on the wooden floor, watching the faint blue hue of morning slip in through the window. There was a clarity in early hours, she discovered, a space between yesterday's noise and today's demands. In that sliver of quiet, she felt more herself than she ever had in the high-ceilinged penthouses or marble dressing rooms of her former life. Downstairs, Cal was already up. She could hear him moving around the porch, the muffled creak of old boards under his boots, the thud of split firewood stacked into a neat pile. He'd never asked her to help. He never seemed to expect anything, and somehow that made her want to offer more. Evelyn pulled on her flannel shirt, tied her hair back in a quick braid, and stepped outside. The morning air was crisp, sharp with pine and dew. Cal looked up as she approached, a half smile playing on his lips. Couldn't sleep? He asked. Didn't want to. She knelt beside the stack and reached for a log. Teach me? He raised an eyebrow. Chopping wood? She nodded. Seems like a useful skill. You planning on staying long enough to need it? Evelyn paused. The air between them held the question longer than his words did. I don't know, she said honestly, but I'm not planning to leave either. Cal nodded slowly, then handed her the axe. By mid-morning, they had a modest stack split and stacked beside the cabin. Evelyn's arms ached, her fingers raw, but she grinned like a child who'd built her first treehouse. She stood with Cal on the porch, hair frizzed from the effort, sawdust clinging to her sleeves. I feel like I earned lunch today, she said. Cal chuckled. You're dangerous with that axe. Might have to keep you around. She looked at him then, suddenly serious. You want me to stay? He didn't hesitate. Yes. It was the first time either of them had said it aloud. The moment hung in the air. Not dramatic, not charged, just true. Before Evelyn could respond, the sound of tires on gravel broke the stillness. A car was coming up the winding road. They both turned, shielding their eyes against the sun. The vehicle was unfamiliar. Sleek, black, government-tinted. Not the type that stumbled upon cabins by chance. Cal stepped forward instinctively, positioning himself slightly in front of her. The car stopped, and a man in a charcoal suit stepped out. He held a leather folder under one arm and wore an expression that was too polished to be casual. Miss Evelyn Hale? He asked. Evelyn's chest tightened. Yes? I'm Greg Sims, Legal Affairs Liaison for Hale and Price Holdings. I've been sent to deliver documentation and offer clarification on behalf of your family's estate. She frowned. Clarification? The man held out the folder. As you're aware, your absence has disrupted several pending agreements, charitable trust transitions, board seat appointments, and a multi-million-dollar merger dependent on your union with Mr. Colin Price. Evelyn didn't reach for the folder. Greg continued. Your decision, while personal, has implications. Your father has requested your presence for a final discussion. Not a demand, merely a chance to speak. Evelyn was quiet. Cal stood beside her, saying nothing, but watching her with steady calm. Finally, she took the folder and opened it. Inside were documents thick with clauses, initials, footnotes, pages meant to remind her of the life she'd been born into, not the one she'd chosen. I'm not signing anything, she said quietly. No one's asking you to. Yet, Greg said. But there are consequences to walking away. Legal ones. Financial ones. It's best to be informed. I've had people trying to inform me my whole life, Evelyn replied. Funny how none of them ever asked me what I wanted. Greg's expression didn't shift, but his tone softened. Then let me ask now. What do you want, Miss Hale? Evelyn looked past him, at the cabin behind her, at the trees, the lake, the scent of cedar and wood smoke in the air. I want to build a life I'm not trying to escape from. Greg said nothing for a moment. Then he offered a faint nod. I'll tell them you're thinking. I'm not, she replied, her voice clear. I'm deciding. After the car left, Cal and Evelyn sat on the porch in silence. The sunlight had changed. It felt warmer now, like it was rooting for them. Are you okay? He asked. She looked at him. That's the strange part. I think I am. He exhaled slowly. They're not going to give up easy. I'm not either. Cal nodded, proud without needing to say so. Then almost shyly, Evelyn turned to him. You know what I want to do? What? I want to make something with permanence. Not just the carvings. Something real, tangible, a place. He raised an eyebrow. A gallery, or maybe a community workshop. For women, for anyone who was told they weren't allowed to create. Cal smiled. Sounds like a hell of a thing. I don't know where to start. You just did. She smiled, then leaned against him, her head on his shoulder. They sat like that, the quiet not empty, but full of direction. They weren't just healing anymore. They were planning. That night, as the fire crackled and the stars stretched out above them in their full spring brilliance, Evelyn wrote her first letter to a lawyer, not from the office of her father's empire, but from a wooden chair beside a man who split firewood and believed in silence. She wasn't fighting anymore. She was claiming. And somewhere between the ache in her arms and the ink on the page, Evelyn realized she had crossed a threshold, not of geography, of identity. And there would be no going back. The fire crackled behind the cabin, flames rising with soft urgency into the evening sky. Sparks lifted and twirled like fireflies before dissolving into the dusk. Cal stood beside the fire pit, arms crossed, the hem of his flannel shirt catching the glow of the flames. Beside him, Evelyn held the wedding dress in both hands. It had been hanging on the porch for weeks, drying and aging with the weather. The once pristine white had dulled, the lace edges grayed by smoke and sun. It was no longer a symbol of beauty, it was a relic, a husk of an identity that had never truly belonged to her. "You don't have to," Cal said softly. "I do," Evelyn replied. She stepped forward, took a breath, and slowly fed the gown into the fire. At first, nothing happened. Then the flame licked the satin, and a faint hiss rose into the night air. The fabric curled, turned black, then disappeared in glowing ribbons. The veil went next, then the intricate beaded belt her mother had insisted on. Evelyn didn't cry. She watched. Not with bitterness, not with regret, but with resolve. Earlier that day, she'd returned from town with Cal, both of them dusty from their errand run. Evelyn had used her visit to the local credit union to open her first bank account in her own name, not tied to family trust funds or shared holding companies. Her ID still bore her old address, but that would change soon. Everything would. They'd picked up lumber, too. Evelyn had decided to build the first table for her future studio by hand. Cal had offered to help, but she'd surprised him by saying no. "I need to try it myself," she'd said, "even if it wobbles." That afternoon, as he repaired a broken hinge on the back shed, Evelyn had worked barefoot in the grass, sketching out the tabletop with chalk and carving lines into the cedar planks. Her hands blistered, her knees were sore, but her smile never faded, not even once. Now, as the fire began to die, Evelyn sat on a log and stared into the glowing coals. Cal handed her a mason jar of water and sat beside her, close but not crowding. "I thought I'd feel lighter," she murmured. "And I feel honest, like I'm not carrying someone else's dream anymore." Cal nodded. "That's a good kind of weight to lose." They sat in silence for a while. The trees swayed gently around them, and the night buzzed with the sounds of crickets and owls. The sky above was wide and black, littered with stars. "I used to imagine this," Evelyn said, eyes still on the fire. "Not the burning dress part, but the quiet, the stillness, the feeling that I didn't have to check my phone or smile when I didn't want to. I just never thought I'd actually find it." "You did," Cal said. She looked at him, brow furrowed slightly. "Why did you help me that day?" "Really?" He thought for a moment before answering. "Because I saw someone sitting alone in the back of a car with the engine dead and the door locked. And I knew that feeling. It didn't matter who you were." Evelyn swallowed hard. "I didn't even know who I was." "You do now." She didn't respond right away. Then, "I think I'm falling for this life." Cal turned to her. "And what about the man who comes with it?" Evelyn looked at him, fully, deeply, no hesitation. "I haven't figured that part out yet, but I'm not afraid of the answer anymore." He smiled, not a triumphant smile, but one of deep respect. He hadn't pressed. He never had. And maybe that was why she felt safe enough to stay. The next morning, Evelyn woke before dawn again. This time, not because she was unsettled, but because she was energized. She dressed quickly, pulled her hair into a messy bun, and stepped into the shed studio. Light hadn't yet spilled across the hills, but she didn't need it. Her hands knew where everything was now. She sanded the tabletop, adjusted the legs, and tightened the braces. It was a little crooked, but strong, imperfect in all the right ways. When she finished, she stood back, breathing hard, her shirt sticking to her back with sweat. Then she laughed, a full, rich, surprised laugh, the kind she hadn't heard from her own lips in years. Cal walked in a few minutes later, holding a cup of coffee in each hand. "You building furniture or an empire?" "Maybe both," she said, eyes gleaming. He looked at the table. "That's solid work. It's not symmetrical. It's yours, that's what matters." She took the coffee from him, their hands brushing, and for the first time she didn't pull away. She let her fingers rest on his, just for a second too long. He didn't move, just smiled into his cup. Later that day, a letter arrived by courier. No envelope, just a single folded page, handwritten in blue ink, from her mother. It read, "Dear Evelyn, I saw the headlines. Your father's furious. He says you've shamed the family. But I think you've done something much braver than any of us ever had the nerve to try. You're not just my daughter. You're the woman I wish I'd been. Don't come back, not unless you want to. But if you ever open a gallery, I want to be your first client. Love, Mom." Evelyn read it twice, then handed it to Cal without a word. He read it, folded it once more, and placed it on the mantel beside her carved deer. "You think she means it?" Evelyn asked. "I think people who change late still change." That night they walked down to the lake and stood barefoot in the shallows. The stars shimmered above them, mirrored on the surface below. Cal took her hand, gently, reverently, like he was asking a question without words. Evelyn tightened her fingers around his. "Yes," she whispered, "to the lake, to the stars, to the man beside her, and most importantly, to herself." Word had traveled quickly through the valley. It wasn't the kind of gossip laced with scandal, but the quiet ripple of something remarkable. The Hale girl who ran from her wedding and found herself knee-deep in sawdust and truth. Evelyn didn't seek the attention. She barely noticed it. Her world had narrowed in the best way, to mornings filled with carving, afternoons fixing up the studio with Cal, and evenings shared on the porch, where the silence between them had grown soft and sacred. But now it was time. The Hale Foundation's annual Spring Gala, a high society event held every year in Portland, was less than a week away. It had been on Evelyn's calendar since she was 18, always as a silent participant, shaking hands, posing for cameras, echoing lines her family expected her to memorize. This year, however, something was different. They invited her not to be seen, but to speak. "I don't have to go," she said to Cal, the invitation resting like a dare on the workbench. "You don't," he said, sanding the edge of a stool she'd been building. "But do you want to?" "I don't know. I think I want them to see me. The real me, not the girl they groomed to say the right things." "Then don't go to perform," he said. "Go to stand your ground." Evelyn stared at the invite again. There was a space for a keynote speech. She could fill it, or she could burn it like the dress. But the dress had been someone else's story. This was hers. On the night of the gala, Evelyn walked into the grand ballroom alone. No driver, no parents on her arm. Just her in a navy blue dress she'd bought off the rack from a local shop, hemmed by hand, paired with boots that still bore scuffs from her carving shed. Her hair was loosely pinned, a carved wooden brooch in the shape of a fawn tucked at her collarbone. She didn't enter to whispers. She entered to silence. Not out of judgment, but awe. The girl who had once been little more than a porcelain figurine in a mansion had become someone with substance, someone impossible to ignore. Maggie was already there, waiting by the wings of the stage with a nervous smile. "You came," she whispered, her eyes shining. "I'm not here to make anyone comfortable," Evelyn said gently, "but I'm here to be true." A tap on the microphone silenced the room. "Ladies and gentlemen," the host said, "please welcome Evelyn Hale." The applause was polite, restrained. Evelyn walked to the podium and set down her note cards. Then, without looking at them, she slid them aside. She looked at the audience, her former world. Men in tailored tuxedos, women with diamond necklaces and frozen smiles. A sea of faces she'd once studied for approval. "I had a speech prepared," she began, "full of the usual thanks and platitudes. But I left it behind. Just like I left behind the idea that I needed to be someone else to belong in this room." A hush fell. "Real. Listening." She continued. "I didn't run from my wedding. I walked. I walked away from a life where I was seen, but never heard. Where I was applauded, but never understood. And I walked into the woods, into silence and solitude, and yes, into uncertainty." She paused, scanning the crowd. She spotted Colin near the back. He looked like a statue carved from disappointment. "I found a cabin. I found a man. But more importantly, I found myself, covered in sawdust, with blistered hands. I found that I could build something from nothing. Not just furniture, but meaning." People leaned forward now, unblinking. "My name is Evelyn Hale, and I'm no longer a daughter of legacy. I'm the woman who chose to stop performing and start living. She stepped away from the podium. The room, after a stunned moment, erupted. Not the kind of applause that comes from politeness, but from recognition, from admiration, from release. Backstage, Maggie wrapped her daughter in a hug that didn't need words. For the first time in years, Evelyn didn't feel braced for a critique, only love. I'm proud of you, her mother whispered. I'm proud of me too, Evelyn replied. When she stepped outside, Cal was waiting by the truck. You were incredible, he said, his voice steady as always, but his eyes, they gleamed. You watched? She asked, surprised. He nodded. Streamed it on my phone. Had to borrow signal from the florist down the road. She laughed and leaned into him. I was afraid I'd fall apart up there. You didn't. I didn't, she echoed. I told the truth. They drove home with the windows cracked, the air sweet with early summer bloom. Evelyn's hands were still trembling slightly, but not from fear, from adrenaline, from having stood tall in a place that once made her feel so small. And somewhere past the dark tree line, as the truck turned onto the gravel road that led home, she looked at Cal. I think I know what I want next. He glanced at her. I want to make this permanent. Not just us, not just the cabin. I want to build something for others. A studio, a sanctuary, a place for women like me, who forgot how to dream. Cal reached for her hand and laced his fingers with hers. Then let's build it, he said. And in that quiet promise, against the backdrop of a world she no longer feared, Evelyn knew. She hadn't burned her past to escape it. She'd burned it to illuminate her future. The summer rolled in slowly, like honey over warm bread. Thick, golden, unhurried. At the cabin, life had settled into something deeper than routine. It was rhythm, it was pulse, it was breath. Evelyn rose each day before the sun, pulled on her boots, and made her way to the shed she'd transformed into a full-fledged studio. The scent of cedar and linseed oil had replaced the stale shadows. Her first table was no longer alone. There were chairs now, stools, carved wall panels, and a hand-chiseled bench she planned to donate to the local library. The old Evelyn, her polished ghost, would never have believed this, that she could find peace in splinters and sweat, that the noise inside her could finally go still. And Cal was simply there, constant, not in her way, never behind her, just beside her, in the way only a man who respected a woman's space truly could be. That morning he found her in the studio brushing a soft cloth over a sculpture. A tall, slender woman reaching toward the sky, her wooden face calm, eyes closed, palms open as though receiving something from the clouds. She's beautiful, he said, stepping quietly behind her. She's becoming, Evelyn murmured, setting down the cloth. Still rough in some places. Just means she's honest. Evelyn smiled. Cal handed her a mug of coffee, his thumb grazing hers in the exchange. You've been working nonstop. Thought you'd want a break. I don't want to stop, she said, but I do want to share. He tilted his head. With who? With women like me, girls who grew up thinking their only value was in being chosen, not in choosing. I want to build a space where they can create without permission. Cal nodded slowly. You thinking local? Or are we talking statewide? Evelyn's eyes widened. We? Well, you're not building this alone, are you? She stared at him. I didn't know you wanted that. I don't want anything else, he said softly. You've given me more purpose than I ever thought I'd earn back. She swallowed, suddenly unsteady. I want to show you something, he added. They drove 30 minutes down winding roads past the edge of the lake, through a field of wildflowers just beginning to bloom. Cal turned off the main road onto a narrow path Evelyn didn't recognize. The truck jostled gently over roots and gravel before stopping at a clearing. The sun had broken through the trees, casting warm light over a flat patch of land that looked out over the valley. Tall pines framed it on either side, and just below, a slow-moving stream curved like a ribbon through wild grass. Evelyn stepped out of the truck, stunned. What is this place? Cal walked to her side, a folded sheet of paper in his hand. I bought this land 5 years ago, he said, right after I moved here. Thought maybe one day I'd build a workshop, a garage, something, but I never touched it. It didn't feel right. He handed her the paper, a deed, in his name. Until now. She stared at it, then at him. Cal, I want to give it to you. She blinked. No. His brow furrowed. I mean, not like that. Not just as a gift. I want to build something with you. Something real. Something that helps others find what we found. He smiled, the corners of his eyes crinkling. That's what I meant. They stood in the middle of the clearing as the wind moved gently through the grass. Evelyn turned to him fully, heart thudding. I need to ask you something, she said, voice trembling. He nodded. She reached into her jacket pocket and pulled out a tiny sculpture, one she'd been carving secretly for days. It was a simple thing, rough but sincere. Two hands gently cupped together, palms up. I'm not asking you to marry me, she said, smiling through a tear. Not yet, not unless you want that. But I'm asking you to keep building this life with me, to be my partner, to be the hands I can trust, the silence I can rest in, the truth I don't have to hide from. Cal looked down at the carving, then back up at her. His voice was low, steady, the way it always was when something mattered. I already am. She stepped into his arms and they stood there, holding each other beneath the pines and the sky and everything they'd earned. Not by chance, not by rescue, but by choice. That night back at the cabin, they sat on the porch with their boots kicked off, feet resting on the railing, 2 mugs of tea cooling beside them. The air buzzed with the soft chorus of crickets, and the moon cast a silver sheen across the tops of the trees. Evelyn looked over at Cal, her head resting on his shoulder. I used to think love had to come with a grand gesture. Flowers, rings, speeches. He smirked. You're saying I missed my cue? She nudged him with her elbow. I'm saying, this is better. You showed up. You stayed. You listened. You never asked me to be anything but myself. Seems to be working out. She reached for his hand. Let's build it. The studio, the program, all of it. I've already got a name, he said. Her eyebrows lifted. Open Hands. She stared at him, stunned. That's what I called the sculpture. I know. He didn't need to say more. Not in that moment. Because when a love is built on kindness, truth, and quiet steadiness, the words don't have to be perfect. They just have to be earned. The first morning of fall arrived not with fanfare, but with a hush. A thin veil of mist floated low over the lake, and the leaves had begun their slow turning, tinges of gold and rust brushing the tips of the trees. Evelyn stood at the edge of the clearing, where the pines broke into open sky. Below, the land was coming to life. The studio's frame stood proud and solid, its beams freshly stained, windows waiting for their panes. A wooden sign leaned nearby, not yet hung but already imbued with meaning. Open Hands. It had been 3 months since she and Cal laid the first board. 3 months of early mornings, tired arms, and shared sandwiches on sawhorses. But it hadn't felt like labor. It had felt like becoming, brick by brick, choice by choice. Inside the nearly finished studio, sunlight streamed through the open rafters, casting long stripes across the dusty floor. Shelves had been built. Workbenches lined the walls. And at the center of it all sat Evelyn's sculpture, the tall woman with eyes closed and arms lifted skyward. She'd named her Stillness, not for stagnation, but for the kind of peace that follows storm. That afternoon, Cal returned from town, his truck bed filled with toolkits, fabric swatches, and 2 large crates donated by a local arts co-op. He found Evelyn seated on the floor of the studio, barefoot, sanding a bench with practiced grace. He leaned in the doorway for a moment, watching her. She hadn't noticed him yet. She was humming softly, utterly content. Guess we're open for business now, he said, stepping inside. Evelyn looked up, wiping her hands on her jeans. Almost. He set down the crate and opened it, revealing dozens of carving tools, each etched with initials, donated by women from nearby towns, some engraved with notes like, "For the girl I used to be," or "So no one feels alone with their hands full." Evelyn blinked quickly. It's happening, isn't it? It already is. They walked the perimeter together, imagining the rest, the cozy corner with coffee and conversation, the table near the window for watercolor afternoons, the shelves filled with clay and brushes, open to anyone brave enough to begin again. Do you remember, Evelyn said, the first time we sat on this land? Cal nodded. You said you bought it years ago, but didn't know why. Yeah, well, now we do. The grand opening was modest by design. No velvet ropes, no media, just people. Mothers who hadn't painted since their teens. Veterans healing in wood and stone. Young girls with calloused fingers and sparks in their eyes. A few arrived hesitant, unsure, but they left barefoot, laughing, cheeks streaked with sawdust or smudges of pastel. Maggie came too. She brought scones and two carved spoons Evelyn had made as a child, dug from the back of an old drawer, polished and preserved. These were always my favorite, she whispered. She wasn't trying to atone anymore. She was simply showing up, and that, Evelyn thought, was more than enough. One evening, after the last car had disappeared down the gravel drive, and the wind had picked up in that specific way it does just before the stars come out, Cal and Evelyn sat on the porch of the studio, their legs stretched out, backs against a beam. No words, just the hum of cicadas, the warmth of nearby lanterns, and the creak of fresh wood settling into place. Finally, Evelyn broke the silence. Do you think it'll last? This place, this feeling? Cal looked up at the sky, then at her. I think it will, because we didn't chase it. We built it. She rested her head on his shoulder. People keep asking if we're getting married. And I tell them we already did, just without the paperwork. Every day we choose this life, we say, I do again. Cal smiled. Then I guess we're lifers. She laughed, soft and full. As the seasons changed, so did the rhythm. The studio grew. Grants came in. Partnerships bloomed. Local schools sent students. Word spread further than either of them imagined. But even as the impact widened, their world remained anchored. By evening walks to the lake, by pancakes on quiet Sundays, by the kind of steady love that didn't need fireworks to feel real. One winter night, long after the last guest had left and the fire was low in the hearth, Evelyn found a small carved box on her workbench. Inside was a ring, not flashy, not expensive, just simple wood, inlaid with a strip of silver. A note was tucked inside. You've already said yes. This is just the punctuation mark. She smiled, closed the lid, and slipped the ring onto her finger, then walked outside where Cal was already waiting under the stars. No ceremony, no crowd. Just two people, one quiet promise, in a world they'd built with their own hands. And in that stillness, warm, human, and alive, Evelyn understood. Sometimes the most extraordinary thing in life is choosing what's real, what's yours, and what's enough. And now I'd love to hear from you. Where are you watching from? Was there a moment in this story that touched your heart or reminded you of someone in your life? Let's keep this beautiful conversation going in the comments below. I read every one of them, and your words mean the world. If this story brought you a little peace, a little hope, or a gentle smile today, please consider subscribing to the channel and turning on the bell icon so you don't miss the next story waiting to find you. Thank you so much for spending this time with me. Take care of your heart, and I'll see you in the next story.